Yes, Nana.
Thank you very much. Good day or evening or morning, depending on where in the world you are. My name is Nana Gulic. I am part of the International Center for Innovation and Education, and my job today is to give some introductions about today's panelists. So I'm going to go ahead and start. Our first speaker will be Christine Boyko-Head, or well, after Taisir. She has her PhD at McMaster's University, and she's an interdisciplinary scholar, a creative education consultant, thinking preferences and design thinking facilitator, curriculum specialist, author, and playwright. She has taught, presented, and published nationally and internationally. Between 2001 and 2011, she confirmed her belief in the empowerment of learners through the arts by teaching for Lesley University's integrated teaching through the Art Master of Education program. Currently, she applies creative problem solving and arts-based strategies in the college classroom to create anti-oppressive spaces, enhancing learners' creative critical thinking. Her eclectic experiences include television production, creating and operating a social issues theater company, co-funding an arts magazine for and by young people, creating a community mentoring 4-year curriculum for youth, designing and implementing a $1 million fundraising community campaign, being an Ontario College Program Quality Auditor, and researching applied theater strategies to increase learner self-efficacy and literacy. Alert to new learning opportunities, she is currently trialing an intercultural collaboration between Canadian post-secondary students and elementary schools students in Croatia. She is also designing a creativity curriculum for recovering substance abusers in her community. Her energized interactive workshops have given her the opportunity to meet dedicated educators and lifelong learners around the world, including 21 states in the USA, Israel, Turkey, Jordan, Portugal, France, and now Finland. She lives in Southern Ontario, Canada, and teaches at Mohawk College. Our next panelist is Connie Phelps. She has an education doctorate, and she directs the Gifted, Talented, and Creative program at Emporia State University. In 2019, she received the inaugural Dr. John E. King Endowed Professor Award, recognizing impact on students. Prior to her university appointment, she taught middle school, gifted student language arts and social sciences, provided consultation services for high school gifted students, and identified elementary gifted students on an itinerant basis in the Wichita Public Schools. She completed doctoral studies in elementary education at the University of Arkansas and graduate degree in elementary education at East Texas State University and gifted special education at Emporia State University. She also directs the Great Plains Center for Gifted Studies, where she conducts research on creativity, social and emotional issues, gifted girls, and innovative teaching and learning practices. She leads gifted program accreditation reviews and serves as a lead site visitor for the Council for the Accreditation of Education Preparation. Then it is my honor to introduce to you Dr. Fred Bonner II. He's a professor and endowed chair in educational leadership and counseling and executive director and chief scientist of the Mac 3 Center at Prairie View A&M University. He is formerly the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Endowed Chair in Education in Graduate School of Education at Rutgers University, and an esteemed expert in the field of diversity in education. Prior to joining Rutgers, he was Professor of Higher Education Administration and Dean of Faculties at Texas A&M University College Station. He earned a BA in Chemistry from the University of North Texas, an MS Ed in Curriculum and Instruction from Baylor University, and an Ed.D. in Higher Education Administration and College Teaching from the University of Arkansas. Bonner has been the recipient of numerous awards, including the American Association for Higher Education Black Caucus Dissertation Award and the Educational Leadership Counseling and Foundations Dissertation of the Year Award from the University of Arkansas College of Education. His work has been featured nationally and internationally. He is the author of several books, including Building on Resilience, Models and Frameworks of Black Male Success Across the P to 20 Pipeline. And our final panelist is Dr. Taisir Subhi Yamin. He is a General Director of International Center for Innovation in Education, and he will be taking over the session for the remaining of the day. If you will have any questions, there will be time after the four presentations to ask any questions from the panelists. So sit back, enjoy. We're in for a treat.
Thank you so much, Nana, for this introduction. And the session will take place as follows. I will start with talking about myths and realities in gifted education. I will try to be short as possible in order to cover all the main areas, and then we will proceed with our keynote speakers from different countries. When it comes to this topic, we can find out that it is really well documented, especially in different institutions. For example, the National Association for Gifted Children in the USA, the National Research Center on Gifted and Talented at Connecticut University. So if you search for this topic, you will find a huge amount of data and a large number of articles that address this topic. Of course, if we would like to talk about gifted education, we have to make it as simple as possible in order to make policymakers and people who are interested in gifted education to deal with this issue. And this is according to Albert Einstein, we have to make it as simple as possible. Of course, any problem, we have to think about it. We have to handle it in a different way. And as Albert Einstein said, the significant problems that we face cannot be solved by the same level of thinking that created them. First of all, we have compiled a list of the most prevalent myths and realities in gifted education. First of all, many people think about the conception of giftedness. It is the same as the conception of talent. And this is not true because there is a clear distinction between these two conceptions. And we have to think about how could we differentiate between these two conceptions. The second myth that there is no need to identify the gifted, creative, and talented students. And also this is not true. What about when talking about the whole school population and educational democracy? Then we are talking about the screening and identification process, and some people think it is time consuming. And you will listen to Connie Phelps, how she was working and she is still working on a number of practices relating to identification and the programming or programs designed to meet the needs of the gifted students. Of course, we witness there is ill-structured and politically oriented employed methods for screening and identification, or the employment of outdated tools, or not qualified personnel and psychologists who are handling and running the screening and identification process. But the solution will be up-to-date, reliable, valid, cultural-free, multiple criteria screening and identification process. And in the audience, we have one of the well-known scholars in the field. We are talking about Jack Niglieri, who already developed one of the main tools needed in gifted education. So he is with us also. If you have any question, you can talk to him during the discussion session. Then we are talking about gifted students that they don't need any help. And of course, this is not true. And also in the audience, I have my friend Trevor Tibbs, who is always talking about two types of needs For example, we are talking about cognitive pedagogical needs. We are talking about social, emotional, and psychological needs. And then you can think about the consequences if we are not able to meet these two different types of needs. Then we hear some people talking about that everyone is gifted in some way, or all children are gifted. Based on what? We don't know which definition you adopted. And then you came to this conclusion. But what about the normal distribution? And what about, we have the majority of people in certain area, which is around 70% of the whole population. And then we have around 10 or to 15% above average. Then some people are talking about gifted programs or are elitist. And also policymakers are making use of this argument in order to justify the lack of special programs designed to meet the needs of the gifted students, or the lack of national agenda to invest in gifted education. Of course, consequently, we don't have any strategic or action plans that could be employed to develop gifted programs or to overcome the challenges in the regular school or the regular classrooms. Some people talking about the gifted students as a homogeneous group, or the gifted students are a homogeneous group. Of course, this is not true, because based on the screening and identification process, we know there are differences according to abilities, interest, learning style, expression style, motivation level, and values. And of course, there are other categories. And also, some people criticizing acceleration, and they say acceleration options are harmful. And this is also not true. If you go back and you find one of the main references and research done by Nicholas Colangelo at Bailey Blank Center, he already made a huge study about the impact of acceleration and the importance of acceleration to be employed in the schools and to be employed in gifted programs. And he found that gifted students will be more happy, successful, and more productive if we are able to provide them with challenging opportunities. Also, some people saying about giftedness is associated always with high achievement and the creativity. Again, what about gifted underachievers, gifted not creative, who are not creative, or gifted and creative students? What about twice exceptional? So these are also a number of issues. Then we are talking about students, as they love school, they will behave, also they are happy, well adjusted, and so on. But then when and based on what you come to this conclusion? Because if you are offering certain programs like thinking, design, and the skills in engineering, you teach for productive thinking, you take into consideration the type of enrichment activities that they are enjoyable, they get students engaged and enthusiastic to do work, then they will achieve. Also, you are taking into consideration the students' interests based on the research done by Renzulli and his colleagues, and then you offer the opportunities, resources, and so on. Then by the end of the day, it depends on the type of programs we are going to offer the gifted students. Teachers love to have gifted students in the classroom. And also, who are these teachers? Are you talking about the regular classroom teachers or well-qualified teachers who already get capacity building and they know how to deal with the gifted students? And so on. So gifted students come from white, middle class, or upper class families. Of course, gifted children are represented in all cultural, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups, and so on. So gifted students don't know that they are different unless someone tells them, but also this is not true, because they know they are gifted and they have special abilities and they know how to deal with, but they need help and they need the right program to be offered. And also, gifted children are equally mature in all areas, including academic, physical, social, and emotional. They have fewer problems than others. And as I said before, we have Trevor Tibbs, who always dealing with students, gifted students with special needs or gifted students with problems, but sometimes we can say they may have cognitive development away or above their age group, but still they are in need when it comes to the physical, social, and emotional needs, and so on. Gifted children are easy to raise and educate. Also, this is not true, because if you talk about well-being, if you talk about parenting and these issues, then you find that it is not easy at all to raise and educate the gifted students. Some people talking about about gifted programs, and they are very expensive. Yes, we can say it is very expensive. Maybe it is very expensive, but if you think that you are teaching for productive thinking and you are investing in giftedness, maybe you will get what we call return on investment. And the investment might be you spend $1, you get 14,200, or maybe much more, like 32,000 for each dollar you invest in gifted education, and so on. And of course, there are many other issues. I will not take that much of your time, but normally we have to take into consideration the big picture. We are talking about social responsibility. We talk about internship, ownership, networking, service, in-service capacity building programs and facilities needed for the gifted program. We need continuous investment in gifted education, and so on. But we are in need for what we call paradigm shift in gifted education. If we compare what we used to witness and during the last 20, 30 years, then we can say there's a huge difference from what we started with and what we have today. For example, when we talk about the nomination methods, or the screening and identification process, the labeling issues, the conception issues, the tools we have already, and so on. If you are interested in this topic, then during the discussion, we can address some of these issues, but this is just like a very brief introduction to what we are going to talk about today in this symposium. Of course, there are very interesting topics also, like when we talk about dogmatism in gifted education. And of course, we remember Don Ambrose, who edited this book about dogmatism in gifted education. And I think you know what it means, dogmatism. And we also could talk about inertia in gifted education and why this inertia. And when we talk about conception of inertia, it is in physics. And we have Dr. Muhammad Sandouk also. He is a well-known physicist, and he knows what it means when we talk about inertia in physics. In gifted education, we can define it in the context of this field of knowledge as the lack of competences. And when we talk about competences, normally I'm talking about knowledge, skills, knowledge mobilization, expertise, and attitudes. And of course, we need competences in order to produce a new knowledge that is necessary to advance our field of knowledge. And of course, when we talk about paradigm shift, also it is physics, it is a conception in physics, and it means throwing theories, conceptions, definitions, processes, tools, approaches, programs that can no longer stand. These are, as you see, we are in need to take into consideration these three conceptions. When we talk about dogmatism, we talk about paradigm shift, and so on. I will stop here, and I will give the platform to my friend Connie Phelps, and she will, if Christine Boyko-Head with us now or not yet? Is Christine with us?
Not yet, Doctor.
Not yet. Okay, so Connie, I will give you the co-host in order to share your screen. So you could proceed.
Thank you, Taisir. Just a second, I thought I was second, so let me just take a quick second to, unless Fred wants to go first. Let's see here. Okay, I'm almost there.
So Connie, you will come first, and then we have Fred Bonner from Prairie View University in Texas. So he will join immediately after Connie.
Okay, just a second. Sorry, let me get to the PowerPoint part.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. This isn't quite, I hope I have the right one. Just Taisir, could you give me just a quick moment here? Okay, I think I'm sharing, and I think I now have the right thing. Okay, so good morning. Well, hello everyone, wherever you are around the world, and thank you, Taisir, Nana, and I don't know if the Rijeka group is with us yet. Is Darko and Rijeka, are they on with us right now?
Yes, and
Okay,
they have a large number of people in the main theater in the University of Rijeka.
okay. So thank you, Taisir. It's so wonderful to see everyone again. And even if it is on Zoom, Taisir asked me to talk about practices in gifted education in the USA. And I'm in kind of an unusual situation to talk about that because that's all I've been doing for like the last 25 years or so. Taisir mentioned in my introduction that before I came to my university position, I taught gifted children in the Wichita Public Schools. So I believe I had been teaching gifted students in my classrooms as a general education teacher prior to that, at the elementary and middle school level primarily. However, when I came to the university, I was hired as a single faculty program. So that meant I did everything. And I really felt well prepared based on my experiences in the Wichita Public Schools, because I worked with gifted children myself in all levels, K through 12. My primary assignment was in middle school, whereas Taisir said in my introduction, I worked with language arts. I actually taught gifted classes all day long. That's a practice that isn't very often seen. And in fact, they have a different practice now. But during my time, instead of going to their regular classes, the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, so, you know, adolescents, young adolescents, were in my classes. So they had English that was taught for gifted, and geography taught for gifted, civics, and so on. So I literally spent my entire day with gifted students, and I feel that that experience is quite unusual. The only thing that would be comparable to it would be what's called a self-contained school. And Wichita did have that, and I had planned to work there, but instead they put me in what was the state's largest middle school at the time. And I was the only person teaching gifted in the school. So I'm going to be a little bit more personal with my experiences this morning. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself, because that is what I do. And I can't talk about gifted ed in the US without telling you what I do. So I taught regular education before I taught gifted ed, and I think that that's good. I think that teachers who start out in the regular education classroom have some advantages, because they already know about students in schools and the organization, the politics, the pedagogy, and things like that. So when I was in Wichita, as I said, I I taught about 5 classes a day with gifted, just gifted. They were small classes. And then after a couple of years, I started consulting at the elementary level, where I just went to help identify. So that was a program in those schools that really wasn't very active. And because they called me in, they would have to cover my classes in my middle school, and I would help them identify gifted. And I'll tell you, that can be tough. You have to have the right people around you to identify gifted. And during my first meeting, I did get a phone call afterwards from what we call downtown. That would be like, Wichita is the largest school district in Kansas, okay? So I got a phone call because the principal was upset with me. She had been known to say, "Over my dead body, will we identify a gifted student?" And we did identify one that morning. So I guess I was in trouble. She did go on a leave of absence later, and everything was fine with her. But they have a thriving gifted program. But I had to hold the line. I knew it was now or never, do or die. And and I did. And I just, Taisir talked about the myths of giftedness, and this principal of the school actually shared a rather negative story of giftedness. And you'll hear that. You'll hear really bizarre things about gifted. And sometimes we just have to stay quiet, listen, and persevere, and really hold the line with what we know is best for kids. Okay. So when I go through this today, all the pictures are from things I've done, including this first one. Most of them I used Saturday enrichment camps. So I know Croatia is fantastic with learning how to deliver appropriate types of experiences for high ability children, because I've been there and I've seen what you do, and I know it's amazing. And I think it's the same everywhere. Wherever we are, we have to we have to find those cracks. We have to find those small places. And that morning that I sat in the identification meeting, there was a tiny little crack there. When I would drive up to the school, at that particular school, and the teachers were watching students at playground, they would sort of come over to the fence when they saw me coming, and they say, "I think I have a gifted kid in my room." And so when you have some teachers who recognize that, you just need one. And it's helpful if you've got a psychology person who's on board with you to help deliver the assessment. So we'll talk about all of that. And this first photo here is from something I did on molecular gastronomy. This is a classroom across from my office at Emporia State. And I hosted a half-day Saturday enrichment camp a few years ago. And this is a local, what we call CSA, or a community farmer that would subscribe and deliver fresh products to your house. So he was part of that, and those are microgreens that they're preparing. So I'm getting sort of reacclimated to a Croatian group, and I thought a little refresher course would be good. And I'm so happy to say that in 2019, I had the great pleasure of attending not only the ECHA thematic conference in Dubrovnik, which is down here, where I met wonderful people like Zorana from Split, and this is Diocletian's Palace. I'm sure everybody in Croatia knows what these images are here. I was rather interested to see a road sign for a wild pig, sorry. And so I actually stopped in the middle of the road and took that picture. Then of course, this is Dubrovnik too, famous in parts for Game of Thrones. And this is a scene from Game of Thrones with me there. And then climbing up the hill with Darko for coffee during my visit there. And it was a great pleasure to visit the University of Rijeka, and I greet everyone there. And let's move on a little bit. Oops, come on, there we go. Nana was absolutely amazing in setting up all these meetings. I wasn't there very long, maybe about 2 days. And so these are the places I went. And when I say you find the cracks, you find those small places that are connectors. They may seem isolated and unimportant, or what shall I say, lesser than you want them to be, but they are starting points and they are helping kids. And so the recreation center, for instance, the youth center, some of these photos come from there. And here's a photo up here in the top corner of some of the services that you're already doing in Rijeka and across the country. So, and these people that I met are very proud and very happy to be supporting gifted education. So I'm glad to see, Taisir, that we're able to contribute to that. So now I tell you a little bit about me. Where is Kansas? Where is that? Well, it's right here. And here's the, it's right in the center of the geographic center of the 48 contiguous states in the United States, literally in the geographic center. And so that's where I live. Does somebody need to ask a question? Okay, maybe somebody just needs to mute their mic. We are known for, we're not a real large city, but we are known for William Allen White, who is a Pulitzer Prize winning writer. We're the founder of Veterans Day, so we're very proud of our armed service people. And then points for anybody who knows the line, "There's no place like home." Anybody know that one? Hope you do. Okay, no one? Okay, put it in the chat if you know where that comes from. I bet you do know, but you may not know that you know. And then at Emporia State, we're known as a teacher's college. We started as a normal school, which began in Paris. The École Normales began there, and they spread to the United States. So this is another way. There were very small beginnings. I guess that's sort of a theme. Small beginnings can become lots more. So for instance, this one-room schoolhouse, if you watch Little House on the Prairie, you probably know about one-room schoolhouses that sits on our campus. I drive past it every time I go to my office. It was moved from another location here, built in 1873. That's really old for us in the United States. And I know when you look at Diocletian's Palace and things like that, it's laughable to think that we consider this old. But we do, and here's the interior of that that's kind of done in an authentic way. We also house the National Teachers Hall of Fame in the Teachers College. So those are awards that are given nationally. And here's part of that center. It's on the first floor of the building that I work in. And then one of the things I really love about inside, you can see these little dioramas here. So we really are about teaching. We're about students. The dioramas were inspired by the miniature rooms at the Chicago Art Institute. And so a retired teacher makes these of classrooms throughout American history. So again, giftedness didn't really start until much later in the United States. However, when you think about the diversity of this one-room schoolhouse, there could be up to 17 different languages spoken in these small little buildings. So when we talk about cosmopolitanism and globalism, the United States was in an interesting position to deal with that from the get-go. So, all we really have to do is look back at our history. And we did diversity because we had to. We had Italians and Germans and French and Polish and, I don't know if we had Croatians or not, but we had a whole lot. Last on this slide is something a little more recent. the memorial to the fallen educators that was inspired by the Sandy Hook shootings. And this is the dark side of education and teaching. But, you know, in addition to commemorating Veterans Day and our armed services, teachers give their lives protecting children. And I'm sorry to say that, but here are the names and they're added all the time. So this is outside the one-room schoolhouse, and I hope you'll come to Emporia sometime. And maybe we can do a symposium here to Taisir when we start traveling more. You mentioned that this is part of the Teachers College. I received the first award for this as an endowed professor, and I really love working with my students who are out there working with gifted children every day. So that's why this is a little bit more personal. All right, so our topics this morning are who are they, because you can't really talk about gifted education without knowing who gifted are, and Taisir's already mentioned all a number of the myths that persist. If there's one thing that we know about the myths of education, in a study that Don Treffinger did in Gifted Child Quarterly, after 25 years, those myths were still there, and we add to them. The pictures here are from the 3 Saturday enrichment camps that I did. This is molecular gastronomy, crime scene investigations. Sorry, that one's, well, I guess both of these are. The third one is Entrepreneurialism 101. So what is it? I hope these pictures help give you an idea that it's not just acceleration, it's not just enrichment, it's meeting the needs of the children where they are. So then we have to look at best practices and figure out how do we do that, okay? All right, so who are they? So this is, I have permission for all, whoops, I'm sorry, it looks like this one is a little repetitive, but who are the gifted? The gifted that I believe are a little bit in the eye of the beholder. So we have to, let me see if what I want is on the next slide. If it will work. Okay. Sorry. It's not advancing like I want. Okay, well, I'll just stay here then. You know, gifted is about what's valued in a society. And so when you think about Croatia, I'm not sure what the values are in Croatia. I know that there are very welcoming people. I know there have been a lot of difficulties that they've faced in the country over the last decades. They're a very old country with many traditions. So what is it that's valued? You know, in the United States, things became valued back in the 1950s because of Sputnik and the space race with the Russians. So all of a sudden, America sort of had to flex its muscles, you might say, to compete with the Russians. And if there's Russians in here, I always feel a little uncomfortable talking about this part, but bear with me. You know, all of a sudden, educators and education in the United States had to up its game, you know, because of the space race, who would get to the moon first. Okay, so the Russians launched Sputnik, and our Secretary of Education, Sidney Marlin, at the time, conducted a very intensive investigation of giftedness. And it was introduced to Congress in 1971 and published in 1972. And the Marlin report is actually the touchstone for gifted education, I believe, in the United States. Because for once, the United States, instead of having these little, you know, scattered, unconnected dots, you might say, the dots started to, you know, have a life of their own and connect and become something, take shape. The Marlin report gave the shape through a definition of giftedness. Now, it's not a definition that you might normally think of in terms of go to the dictionary, look up giftedness. No, it was more about characteristics of giftedness. So there were like 5 of them. The first is always going to be, it seems, intelligence or academic ability. Creativity was second or third, depending on the year that Congress looked at this, because it continued to be discussed for the next 10 or 20 years. And performing arts, visual arts, leadership, and even sports originally was in that listing. Joe Renzulli sat on a committee and helped as a consultant to develop the literature base and the understanding of the Marlin Report. So what did the Marlin Report do? Well, the Marlin Report, in a sense, was a mandate or a direction for all of the states, because I think we had 50 of them. Maybe we didn't quite have 50 at that point, but all of the states, at least the continental United States, all had public school systems. And in the United States, the states decide how they're going to do things, but the federal government can give out laws and that the states sometimes do follow or don't, depending on what type of law it is. So in this case, we would say it was an unfunded mandate. So although the Marlin Report was published, there was never really any funding behind it. The only funding that we have in the United States is what's known as the Javits funding. And the Javits funding is what started the research centers throughout the United States, like the University of Connecticut, where Taisir studied. And that would be Joe Renzulli and others. Yale was another site, University of Virginia. So there were a number of those in the beginning. Connecticut has been very consistent, and Virginia also has been had longevity in that. So why were those centers important? Well, because there was a partnership between the K-12 teachers and university researchers. So the money went to those centers, and it funded research for gifted education across the country. So when the government gives a university center money, they expect it to be disseminated. So when you look at the University of Connecticut and the National Research Center for Gifted Studies, you'll see many, many, many resources that are absolutely free. And the reason they're free is that they are still getting Javits grants. I just attended the National Association for Gifted Conference, and I went to a session on what is the future of research, what's needed in research. It was by invitation, and I attended that. And so you can go to these websites and find all of their publications. So in a sense, they're very service oriented. Anyway, the gifted, to say who they are, the Marlin Report, which subsequently led to funding through the Javits funding and mandates in the states, is actually what started gifted education back in the 1970s. So again, I'm having a little trouble for some reason making my screen go. Let's see. Okay, so what is gifted education? Well, in the states across the all 50 now, every state is supposed to do something, but because we have separation of national and state in the United States, the states decide what the something is. So for instance, in Kansas, our state regulations say that it is intellectual or academic. Other states, like maybe Kentucky or someplace, might say it's all of the areas of the Marlin Report. And many states adopted all areas. Another distinction about Kansas is that it is funded. Not all states have funding for their programs, but Kansas does. And the way that they fund that is by training teachers. So the teacher training becomes very important through an institution like Emporia State University, which has been offering gifted courses for a very long time. And so when teachers receive that training, the school gets, maybe $30,000 from the state to pay for part of that teacher's salary. So that's how it's funded. Otherwise, it has to be other types of grants and things like that for the funding. So not only do all the states get to decide what aspect of giftedness, whether it's intellectual, creativity, visual arts, performing arts, or leadership, which of those they're going to address, and therefore that determines who's going to be in the gifted programs, because they have to be identified according to each state's mandate. Okay, so it gets even more diversified, because every school district can determine how they identify to meet that particular area. So for example, in Kansas, our area is academic or intellectual. Every single school district in the country can decide what tests they're going to use. Are we going to use the WISC? Are we going to use a creativity test or something else? Okay, do I need to answer a question? Is somebody wanting to? Okay, otherwise maybe somebody needs to mute their mic. Okay, so, you know, if you feel that you're sort of out there by yourself, you know, take heart, because the autonomy of making decisions at the local level is very good, but you really need some level of support from the ground up. So it's important to establish some laws at the national level that's going to help protect you. Okay. And so this is what I mean. What qualities are valued in a society? Well, somebody decided at some point that intellectual ability was going to be the way in Kansas, although I suspect it originally included creativity. Then we have to decide how we measure the giftedness. And then we have to, if we're smart, going like Taisir started this morning, we're going to need to identify the myths, because those are in people's minds. And you can't work with people and influence people without understanding how they think. So if they think that giftedness is only for country club people or for people with money or the elite, or if they think that gifted kids are so smart that they don't need any help, those are roadblocks that you need to overcome. As you're talking to legislators, educators, parents, teachers, those are the people that surround us as stakeholders. And they can, sometimes we just really need to address those areas. Okay, so best practices. This is one of the last things I want to talk about. And there are some principles of that have been published by the World Council for Gifted and Talented in 2021. I happen to serve, and I'll put the link in the chat after I was going to put it on the slide, but I'll put the link in the chat so you can go right there. It's free. It's downloadable. And so I was one of 2 people selected from the United States, along with Sheila Gallagher, to serve on this committee that started, I think after 2017, I believe. So we talked about it in Sydney during the conference there. And actually I suggested during sort of a planning meeting that maybe we think about standards, because I've worked a lot with standards in the United States for giftedness, both in my state and at the national level. And, you know, standards are a little scary to some countries, because, you know, if you have a lot of different countries, and the reason that they're scary is that nobody really wants things imposed on them. They want a certain amount of freedom to make their own decisions for what's best for an educational community at the local level. But you still need something to go on. And I'm happy to say that Norma Haffenstein from the University of Denver, who is actually an Emporia State graduate and started the Rick Center for Gifted Children in Denver, a fantastic place if you ever have the opportunity to visit. She is the one who spearheaded this committee and the World Council, along with Julia Roberts and Tyler Clark and representatives. I think there's at least one other person on this call who was on that committee as well. And we had a number of meetings to discuss questions, to talk about how do we do gifted in our country. And many countries, I heard this in Africa in particular over and over, well, we really don't do anything, And so we're hoping that these principles for professional development will help countries who want to strengthen their programs. And I want to say that at no point in time do I wish to say that the United States does it best or does it right. We just been at it for a while, and we have challenges just like anybody else, but we also have been fortunate to have some resources. So I think we can learn from Croatia equally. So when it comes to the 10 principles, there are a lot of really good, it's a framework. It's a framework for you to consider. And there is a research base that is published with it, not exhaustive, but suggestive to kind of give you places to go for additional information. I will put the link in the chat. Okay, this is one of my favorite best practices because it's very comprehensive. And I know Taisir actually taught me this a long time ago. Taisir is always ahead of the curve. And when Renzulli Learning first came out, I attended one of his symposiums on it. And Taisir, would you know that I've done grant-based work with them these past several years? This became free during the pandemic. It's not free. There is a subscription to it, but they will always give you a trial period. So if it's something that you need something that's remote and rigorous and robust, this has a lot of benefits to it. And I'm going to try to wrap up quickly here, but I'll spend just a couple of moments since this isn't as widespread maybe in the United States as it might be, but what it really is a compilation of best practices, because Joe Renzulli has been publishing about giftedness for a very long time. And the profiler, for instance, was actually the interestalizer once upon a time. So what they've done is to take a lot of best practices and pack them into this system, which is, as I said, very robust. And there's far more there than you could ever need. The nice thing about it is that if you're planning instruction for students, you can either have a wizard put it together for you, or you can do it manually using the various tools here. So I believe this is something I did for myself, maybe my profiler, like what am I interested in? What are my learning styles? What are my subject area strengths? What are my preferred modalities of learning? And it takes all of those, well, there's like 4 areas, and in moments, it takes very little time to do the profiler. I know Trevor Tebbs is on the call, and I would love to see, I love what Trevor does with his chandelier system, which is so comprehensive and interactive. But this is good because it can be used in schools. Trevor, I'm not trying to make a comparison with you. I'm just saying yours is very comprehensive. This one really is about how you plan instruction for gifted. And so here's enrichment activities and projects that can develop from. So can you see the progression? This is who I am. This is what would benefit me. And this is what I can do with it. And so, for instance, whatever this one was, in creativity training, there were 134 online activities that would relate to this particular profile. So I'll give you a link for that too in the chat. And here I am, and I'm going to turn it, there's lots of ways you can reach me. The best way is always email. If you actually, for some reason, should call me, it would generate an email with a voice message to it. I'm on Facebook Messenger. I can make phone calls internationally that way that are free. And same thing with WhatsApp, and there it is. So thanks, Taisir. I hope this has been helpful, and I'll put those links in the chat. Okay.
Thank you so much, Connie, for this interesting presentation. And as you see, Connie started with my criticism and my review about myths and realities in gifted education, but this is what, the field is suffering. And she gave us a very clear example about networking and cooperation with different countries, talking about Croatia and, of course, France and other countries in the Middle East. So thank you again. And she has addressed what we call operational definition for the giftedness, because sometimes you can go to the more comprehensive definition, as Renzuli did, but she said, okay, I will focus on the main behavioral characteristics. And then based on that, I will put more effort in order to find the right programs for these kids. And then she concluded with a number of practices here and there, including the ones in Croatia and Rijeka in particular. And she ended with what we call Renzuli learning system, because nowadays we are talking about digitalization. And this system was established a long time ago. And it was meant to be the right platform for gifted students and their teachers. As you know, the teachers are overloaded and they need the right resources, and the Renzuli learning system could offer these resources. So thank you again, Connie, for this presentation. And now we will go to Canada. We are moving from the US to Canada, and today we have with us Christine Boyko-Head. You already heard the introduction from Nana about Christine. So Christine, the platform is yours. I will give you the co-host.
There we go. Okay. I am so sorry, everyone. I have been feeling sick these last few days with a cold. I thought this was later. I thank my dear friend Mahar for sending me a WhatsApp note. Otherwise, I'd still be under the covers. Taisir, my sincere apologies for not coming late. I usually come early.
No problem. No problem at all.
So I hope my voice will hold for this, and if I sneeze occasionally, just be thankful you're on Zoom, so you won't catch what I have. So I am so honored to come and speak with you. Thank you, Taisir and Nana and Sandra, for inviting me. And since I was late, I'm just going to jump in to this because I'm not sure how much time I may have for this, but I want to share my screen.
You have only 2 hours.
2 hours. Oh, well then. Is that all, Taisir?
No, just take your time.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm sharing the wrong screen. Let me start again. Yes, it is funny how the voice really does impact things. Okay. I just need to go back to getting a taskbar here. There we go. So I have been asked to speak about the Mind the Gap project, which, if Taisir had mentioned this in the introduction, I'm not sure. It was is a book that ICIE has published about a research project that I did with my dear colleague here in Canada, Glenys McQueen Fuentes. And so I don't work with gifted students. I work with all students because I'm at the post-secondary level. I teach at a college in Canada and have always done so. So we don't pull students out of the classroom like that. Everyone is integrated. It all depends on the courses that they pick in the program that they're in. So I really wish I would have heard the opening of Taisir's speech, because I think this is going to be right on point, because I'm also thinking about the challenges that we have to do in education. So looking at this picture, which way would you hang this in your office? And if you put it this way and someone walked in and they said, oh, that's the wrong way up, what would you think? Now, some of you may have seen this in the news recently in the last month. This actual painting is by Piet Mondrian, and it apparently has been hanging upside down for 77 years. And no one noticed until now. I don't even know if the way I've reoriented it is the right way, but imagine what else might be upside down. What else haven't we noticed that needs to be turned around? And what are the gaps between these colored stripes? What's in them? Do we even notice them, or does our eye go to the colored stripes and that takes our focus? So the idea of hanging things upside down, what is the right way to do something? And just to kind of get us started with that, I'd like to invite you to do an activity with me. Taisir knows I can never not do an activity with a group. So if you have a piece of paper and a pen, I invite you to just do a scribble on the page, thinking about your favorite musical instrument. So think about your favorite musical instrument or your favorite musical sound. Doesn't mean you have to play it, but take about 10 seconds to just have your hand flow around the page the way that sound moves. So you're just doing a scribble. And, you know, like I did here, if you can see, just on the page, on the screen, or on a piece of paper, and a scribble are random lines going in any direction. And if somebody wants to scribble on the screen, go ahead, that'd be kind of fun. So take about 10 seconds, think about your musical instrument, think about the sound it makes, and have your hand move around the page that way. And we're just doing this really quickly, so you should have some lines by now. Now I'm going to ask you to turn that page upside down. And in the gaps of that scribble, I'd like you to come up with, beautiful, I'd like you to come up with some adjectives. So descriptive words for that sound. And so we're doing a brainstorming right now. Doesn't matter, there are no right or wrongs to the words, they're your words. Describe that sound. And put those words in the gaps. Try and get 5, 6, 10. And when you have a few, look at the words you've selected. And if you could put the top 3 in the chat, that would be terrific. So you're looking for descriptive words of those sounds, and then put your top 3. Smooth, deep, rich, wonderful. Now I mine. Agile, free, deep. Soft, calm, deep, fluid, funny, fast, playful, pleasant, fast. soft, country, comforting, agile, floating. These are great words. Deep, free, spontaneous, beautiful, comfortable, dreamer, accomplished, gentle, calm, soft, resilient, harmonious, relaxing, agile, free, floating, deep, funny, calm. All right, we've got some great words there. You can keep adding them if you like. So now that you put these words here, first, I'm going to say, I hope these words are what you will experience at the end of this session today, that when you walk away from this symposium, you'll feel a sense of calmness, a deepness, a happiness. You'll feel more resilient in your profession. You'll feel floating and free, like ready to conquer the world. I also want you to think about these words and how they might represent you, and how we could use this as a way of introducing ourselves to one another without knowing that what I was asking you to do was tell me about yourself. So I'm going to guess that Dr. Namir is probably a deep thinker as well as a happy person. So there's another way then we can use this. And the third thing I want you to think about in relation to the words you put in these gaps is how rich they are, how rich these words are that filled the gaps. So thank you for doing that. I've got some more words coming up here. And Mind the Gap, which I said was published by Taisir and the International Center for Innovation in Education, is about a unique action research project that I did with my theater professor when I was an undergrad, and she's now a dear friend and colleague, Glenys McQueen Fuentes. And it was a funded research project to explore the treasures that exist within gaps and to see those gaps differently. And when we see gaps, not as voids or holes or empty cavities to be avoided, but rich spaces where we challenge thinking and turn education and our assumptions about learning upside down, we find a richness that we wouldn't see normally because we don't look there. And so the book itself has a number of articles in it about the project. It has different academic articles about some of the frameworks that were used, but it's full of activities that we did in this semester-long course and that I continue to do. And it also has a number of other activities that I've done over the years with my classes. So basically, let me tell you, I teach communications. When you look at the book, you might think, oh, she's a theater teacher or an English teacher or a play teacher. I teach communications, and it is a mandatory course that all our students have to take. So in other words, they hate it. And this has been my experience over the last 11 years at Mohawk College in Hamilton. When students are forced to do something, they of course don't like it. And so we have a lot of instructors teaching this communications course. And what we're covering are the employability skills. We are trying to teach them how to be better critical thinkers, how to be effective communicators, good collaborators, and I throw in there creativity. Creativity is not on our list of objectives, but it's been my mandate for a long time because my background is from the arts. So I've always done arts-based learning and arts-based research. And then probably about 10 years ago, added to that vocabulary the word creativity, because it has a little bit more traction in the college system than if you push the arts. We're still afraid of the arts at the post-secondary level. Creativity, we can see that as an employability skill, especially now because COVID has bumped creativity up in its rankings as an important employability skill. And all of these skills, critical thinking, the collaboration, communication, creativity, and complex problem solving, were things that Dr. Joseph Ewen from the Northeastern University wrote about in a book called Robot Proof, and how we could robot proof the future, meaning how our students could be sustained, I guess, and not be replaced by robots. So these skills are, of course, very important. But how can we as educators fill the skill gap, which we know there is? Employers keep telling us there's a skill gap between what they need and what the students have when they graduate. I mean, how can we fill that skill gap when there is a huge personal gap in our learners? And the words on the page here in this word cloud were generated by my learners during this research project. And I knew this is what they were going to tell me in a pre-course survey, because I had seen this year after year, that we were getting, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, and even my mature students who are in their later 20s and 30s, they would show that they had a lack of self-esteem. They were stressed. They had low morale. They had no confidence. They were unengaged. At least that's, how it seemed, but it could have been that they were bored because they didn't see the work as relevant. They felt no one listened to them. And the list just goes on and on with these social, emotional lacks that they felt. And somewhere along the way, this was reinforced in them. And our Mind the Gap project wanted to try and change that. We know from reports, and I'm sure you've seen it, that because of COVID, all of these things have just been more amplified, and the stress and the anxiety. And in fact, now we can add the fear of the future to that mix. So the gap that I deal with is in students' confidence. It's the gap inside themselves. And that's what I want to try and combat with Mind the Gap. So the project and the book integrates art-based curriculum and creativity to build learner confidence, self-image, self-efficacy, definitely their voice. I want them to feel like they can be heard, and I want to help them to express themselves in a way that people will accept and listen to. And this all leads to leadership skills, of course. So in short, I want to decolonize the classroom and liberate all learners from the rigid thinking. And what that means is I invited them to re-story their narrative, to retell their narrative of what post-secondary education is for them. That means challenging their assumptions of what learning in higher ed should look like and feel like. And rather than tell you more about the project, I'm actually going to show you. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen, and I am going to, hopefully this will work. I will share a video. Go back here. Let me find it. There we go. And I'm going to share a video. Can you see this? Let me see. Can someone put in the chat? I'm going to assume that you can. Oops, I lost the. Okay, so here's a video on Mind the Gap.
The Mind the Gap project approaches a typical communications course from the perspective of applied theater and art-based practices.
We transformed the classroom from a lecture hall to a more collective, responsive experience.
It was always different, so you never really knew what to expect walking into the class. We became really close. A lot of exercises that enhance communication skills and critical thinking.
Seeing gaps as positive spaces, we explored an interactive, democratic framework for teaching 21st century skills, such as communication and collaboration. We celebrated minimizing the familiar and maximizing the diverse as we explored how others think, problem solve, and communicate in ways that might be different from the norm.
Okay, so that worked. Getting some messages here. Okay, let me go back to the PowerPoint now. So that was the Mind the Gap project. That lasted an entire semester. So for us, that went from September till December. And as I said, I use many of those activities still in my classroom. And basically what we're doing in that course is we are teaching communications, we're teaching critical thinking, and we're teaching collaboration. Creative thinking is something I put into the learning outcomes, but there are roughly 50 instructors teaching this course, and none of them, unfortunately, are doing it this way. They're doing it as a read, write, repeat model. And what our approach in Mind the Gap was we used music, we used images. You saw the students jumping up and down. We did not look like your typical post-secondary classroom. And in fact, one of the students that was videotaping our classes, she was hired through the grant that we received, the research grant. She was videotaping every classroom because we didn't know, what would happen in each classroom. So we couldn't tell her, yes, come on this day because this is where you're going to get some good images and shots of the students. She was there the entire semester videotaping. And she went through the communications course a couple years earlier. And during one class, she turned to us and she said, "This is the communications course. They're getting a credit for this. This is too much fun." And so we knew we were doing something right if an observer thought it was too much fun. We had some basic frameworks, 3D briefing, which is something I'll talk about a little bit later in this presentation, and thinking preferences. We did an assessment of all the students to determine their thinking preferences when problem solving, and we used that information throughout the course and reinforced it with students so that they could also self-differentiate the curriculum. So that's basically what our learning outcomes were and how we approach them. Now overall, Mind the Gap plays with the expectations of education, of learning, and of higher education at many, many levels. So we didn't look like every other classroom. We didn't feel like every other classroom. And we played with the idea of authority. Who was the teacher? Who was the learner? And I've since in my vocabulary gotten rid of the word student. And I don't refer to students as students anymore. I call them learners. In my emails, if I'm writing something to my colleagues, I'll call them a learner because that also includes me. And in that way, we hope to decolonize, to anti-oppress the classroom and open it up to new possibilities and opportunities. And during COVID, this sense of play, even in the online environment, became really, really vital. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But I love this quote on the screen here, that through play, we stumble upon new behaviors, thoughts, strategies, movements, and ways of being. And I'm just going to press the wrong button here. Let me see what's going on. during COVID, I was really good at Zoom because we were on it all the time. And now that we're back in the classroom, we're a little bit rusty. So this quote is from Stuart Brown, who is the founder of the National Institute of Play. And when we were doing the project, we didn't use the word play because we knew we were being watched by administration. And so we had to, in a sense, try and show that this was serious business, and play is serious business. Interestingly enough, the book I talked about, I don't think I have it here to show, that the Joseph Ewan book about robot proofing the future talks a lot about, creativity and how we need to be a return to the humanities. But he never once in that book mentions play. And I think we need to put play front and center in what we're doing, because it is vital. And for me, the work I'm doing now is that what we're doing is we're seeking meaningful spaces, especially because of COVID. People have been seeking meaningful spaces, and play can create that. And play for me is connected to ritual. So when we are looking for meaningful spaces, especially during COVID when we couldn't be physical, it was actually something students were looking for even before that. They wanted something that was relevant to them. And when those relevant, meaningful places don't exist, then we have another gap in the educational system. And Glenys McQueen-Fuentes and I jumped into that gap to play. It was probably the hardest course we ever taught, because every day we were redoing the curriculum because the students were creating it with us. So we couldn't have a plan that we could stick to, because a need would arise and we would try and fill that need and fill that gap. So play subsumes the elements of ritual. And since that experiment, I've actually integrated more ritualistic aspects to what I do. And what I mean by that is that I use play, I use the arts, I'm using psychology, anthropology, history, semiotics, literary theories, skill development, creativity, of course. And now I'm actually even using futures studies to create a seriously playful, ritualized learning space for exploring possibilities. And on the screen here is a quote by Victor Turner, who is an anthropologist on ritual and the importance of ritual. And some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with his work. And even though it was written in 1969, and we like to keep things new, I think we need to go back to some of the classics and pull forward into the future some of the great things that people found, discovered, and said. And this idea of rituals reveal the values at their deepest level is really, really important. And people reveal in rituals what moves them most. So let me talk now to how I've ritualized learning spaces, because I think you can do this as well. So during COVID, nobody wanted to be online. We know that. But when I started a session, I never said that. I actually opened sessions by saying, I'm so glad to be here. And that set the tone that this was going to be a special online space. It wasn't a regret. It wasn't an apology. It was an exciting place to be. And I was so glad people joined me on that space. I also played music, and I also had a visual image up on the screen because I allowed students to come in before I did. And that was so that they could talk before the teacher showed up if they wanted to. And having that music and having the visual image there, even before I turned on my video camera to show myself, was really important. And it set this idea that a ritualized learning space is a very specific place in time with a specific purpose, and we all have a specific role to play. And for me, that role was fluid. Sometimes they were the teacher and I was the learner, especially with technology in the early days. We set a contract of safety and respect and fun, that mistakes were accepted and, in fact, in a way desired, because we could learn more from them by deconstructing them. We had an attitude that was of exploration or curiosity, possibility, definitely what ifs. And there was an atmosphere of playful risk and riskful play. And this created energy because you didn't know what was going to happen, much like in the face-to-face classroom in that video. The one student said they never knew what to expect. And I actually have had students say to me, that's why they come to class, because they never know what's going to happen. And so they don't want to miss it. It's like they don't want to miss the party. And then, of course, front and center for my entire teaching career, and probably yours as well, has been this sense of belonging. We want to create a community. You did it in the chat during Dr. Phelps' speech, where people were saying they'd like to have a WhatsApp group form. You were forming community, and that is so important in learning. And can we say that about all our classes? At the higher education level, I'm not so sure that we can. I'm not going to go over this slide. I can send a copy to Taisir and he can distribute it to you. It's something that that I came up with just to show the pathway of what's happening when you are ritualizing the learning space. And, you know, you're clarifying and amplifying the purpose so that, again, it's reinforcing what I said in the last slide, that this is a special place to be. And I thank you so much for coming. We're exploring and then, of course, building community, building energy until finally, and to me, this again has been a shift. I told you I teach communications, I teach collaboration. And right now, I've come to the realization that's not enough anymore. We need to put adjectives in front of those skills, and we need to teach empathetic communication. Anybody can communicate, but can we communicate empathetically with one another? We can collaborate, and we know that people do it poorly most of the time. So maybe we need to put that adjective of equitable collaboration. Let's collaborate fairly, understanding people's strengths and their gaps so that we don't jump to conclusions and assumptions. And we need to be critical thinkers, but creative critical thinkers, as well as ethical critical thinkers and ethical creative thinkers as well. And I think we need that special word in front of these skills now. It's not enough to have just those skills. We have to be responsible and ethical to each other in the world. So here's the result of our course. So at the end, this is the word cloud that is based on what the students wrote in their post-survey responses. So they gained a lifelong skill, there was clarity, there was self-expression, they felt a sense of autonomy, self-esteem, confidence, achievement, strength, except courage in presenting. My goodness, that's the one thing they all fear is presenting. And because of the sense of play we put into what we did, presenting became something that was easy for them by the end. So after experiencing this, this is what the students felt. It was a wonderful, successful year. And that's why I still use many of the tools. And I do have some of my colleagues who are trying, some of the smaller ones because they're new to it. I think those of you in gifted education, those of you in arts education, this would be second nature for you. You would feel comfortable doing this. But at times it's good to be uncomfortable because it pushes us as well. Now I'm actually gamifying my classroom, and that certainly is pushing me because I'm not a gamer, but coming from drama and theater, you of course are used to roles and playing out stories. And so I'm pushing myself that way. So I want to do another activity with you, and then I'm going to wrap this up. And what do you see? So maybe you could put in the chat, what do you see in this picture? If anyone wants to come off mute, they can do that too. We don't have to chat. A river fall, a waterfall. Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls is a little bit bigger, and I invite you to come and see it, but yes. Trees, power, of course. Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought of that. A natural view, the sky, Ithaca Falls. So we're seeing a lot of connections with other falls that we've seen. Yeah, so we're using our experience of falls, a frozen waterfall, a bridge. Yes, there is a bridge in the background if you look really closely. It's a nice picture. Life, change, exactly. So let's see here. Oops. There should be, there we go. So now I'm going to ask you, what do you see? So I'm returning us to the beginning of this presentation with the painting that was hanging upside down for 77 years. When you look at this, we see a reflection of a picture. We see the sky, yes. A big stone. I also see the possibility of a glacier here. I once had the privilege of teaching in Alaska. Actually, I taught in Alaska 6 times and got to see a glacier from a boat. And that's kind of what I'm looking at here. So looking from dawn, mounting, a reflection again. Okay, so if you entered my virtual classroom or my face-to-face classroom, what would you see? If someone entered your classroom, what would they see? So when you turn it upside down and your eyes adjust, what new potential, what new opportunities, what new stories are there? Oh, I like that, the last one there by Ryam, Rising Hope. That's really nice. They were all great. Thank you for that. So at the heart of my ritualized learning space and attempt to challenge pedagogical oppressive systems is this idea of 3D briefing everything. What did you see? So what's the significance of that? And now what did you learn? Or now what actions can we do in the future? We've got some other great ones. Vacuum cleaner for water, imaginative scenario and scenery. Yeah, so this 3D briefing is something that is in the book. I've done talks through Taisir on it because it's really, really crucial to turning everything into a reward. It minimizes the risk because even if things failed, if you wouldn't have put anything in the chat, I still could have turned this into a learning activity by saying, now what would I do differently next time? Or now what did I learn about the fact that no one put things in the chat? So even though we may think that some things are failures and flops, when you go through this, what, so what, now what, the now what goes to the future. It goes to what did we learn from this and what could we change? So we have to turn the system, the educational system, on its head and be daring in our approaches, challenge things, because the system is not creative. Systems are not creative. It's the people within them that are, and that means you and me. We make it creative. So we have evolved to be creative, as Joseph Ayuan says, but we need to keep evolving, and we need to make sure our classrooms and our education system evolves as well. So one final activity for you, and you might want to take this with you and think about it. What if we turned our classroom upside down? What would it look like? What, in fact, could you do in your classroom that you could turn upside down, inside out? And what if you looked into the gaps for treasures? What would you find there? And I just want to make a comment about in Connie's presentation, she had pictures of school desks. And I did a little research about the school desk. And do you know, it has not changed very much at all. They might have, you know, different twists and turns to the tabletop, but they still are hard surfaces. They still keep you upright, your feet on the floor, your back straight. They're facing in one direction. You know, the chairs don't swivel all the way around. Can we change the concept of the desk? And what would that do to education? How would it change the relationship to learning? And with that, I'm just going to leave you with this question. What if we turn things upside down? So thank you very much. And if you have any questions or comments, I'll put my email in the chat because I don't have a slide with that information on. But let me stop sharing here and turn it back to you. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Christine Boyko-Head, for this impressive, interesting, and inspiring talk. And I don't have that much comments, but I assure you that in most of the educational systems around the world, if they follow your suggestion at the last slide, they will be fired next morning.
Sorry for that.
You know, because, you know, decision makers and people who are running rigid educational systems, they are not believing in gifted education or how could we promote creative thinking as you do. And by the end of the day, when we think about the outcomes, we need the critical thinkers and knowledge producers.
Well, I do have to say, I see that Glenys McQueen Fuentes is on the call, and you're absolutely right, Taisir. You have to know your environment and you have to know how safe you are to do things. However, I must say, when Glenys and I were pushing the system, and we really were pushing the system, we actually leveraged the fact that the International Center for Innovation and Education was on our side. And because our administrators had no idea who you were, because you're right, they're not that creative, they don't follow creativity, they just thought, oh, okay, we better back off a little bit because this wonderful institution from Europe is supporting them. So we were able to leverage that in kind of a sneaky way. So sometimes it takes being subversive, but you are absolutely right. It's easy to say things when we live in Canada, in a privileged country where we're protected by unions, and it's very hard to be fired in Canada. It's not even the same in the United States. I had teachers that could be fired between weekends that I was teaching with them. So you do need to keep yourself safe, but think about maybe there are ways, little ways that you can do things.
True. Very true, and I encourage you to keep your questions and comments for the discussion session, which comes after we have the next keynote and the speech by Fred Bonner from the United States. So thank you, Christine. I will move to Fred Bonner now. So, my brother, you have the co-host now, so you can start. We have to unmute. Wait a little bit. Yes.
There we go. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, perfect. So want to say thank you for this invitation. And it's always great to connect and engage with our colleagues, not only here in the US, but across the world. So it's good to be exposed to all these different ideas about gifted education. And it's always interesting to see and hear the different perspectives and how individuals come from their different vantage points based not only on their countries of origin, but also on whatever the cultural nuances are there related to gifted education. So these international intersections are always profound, I think. And so for my section, it was great hearing Christine, all the great work she's doing. I see so many connections with some of the things that she said. Of course, looking at those gaps, filling the in-between. I actually wrote an article about Black males and liminality some years ago about that liminal space. What do we do? Who can we become in those gaps? Who can we become in those places and spaces where we're not defined by poles? So I really connected to her. Connie and I always connect, given some of the great stuff that she's doing there in Kansas and having experiences in Texas. So she very well understands some of the things that I'm dealing with by way of gifted education, particularly for the underserved populations that I focus on. So with that said, and I'm like my friend Christine here, so during the height of COVID, I was quite adept at my Zooming, but let's see now if this happens. And Christine, you're there. I see you're dealing with the cold. I'm here dealing with the cold from with my super senior, my mom here. I'm actually visiting her, so I still haven't returned to my university to Prairie View from Texas. So I'm here at mom's house with my green screen in Texarkana, Texas. So let me see here if I can share my screen and okay. Here we go. Okay, there we go. Can everyone see that? Okay, can everyone see the screen?
We see both, the first one and the second one.
Oh, let's see here. Let me see if I can just,
If you reshare the full screen.
okay. Let's see here. Let me. Okay, is that better? Are you still seeing two? Okay. Is that better?
Not yet.
You have to reshare, Fred. So open the PowerPoint presentation, then go and reshare direct screen.
Gotcha. Let's see here. There we go. Okay, I think I have it now. Let's see.
You know, Fred, you go out, you close the share screen, open
Okay.
first your presentation, then go down, share screen,
Okay, share screen. Let's
then
see.
click on the presentation.
Is that
Yes.
it? Can you see it now?
Yes,
Yes.
perfect.
Okay, good deal. There we go. Okay, so let me go back one. Okay, so this presentation is building on resilience, models and frameworks of Black male success. And since the title got a little long, I cut off across the P20 pipeline. So that is the entire subtitle is models and success, models and frameworks of Black male success across the P20 pipeline. And what is the P20 pipeline? The P20 pipeline is a focus on the experiences of Black males from in the United States, pre-kindergarten, all the way through college, graduate, and professional school. And the reason that we say that, and typically in the US, we talk about P12 or K12, and then we go on to talk about once you graduate from high school, 12th grade, then you move into post-secondary education, into college, and then into graduate school, medical school, law school, professional school, and so forth and so on. So what I have tried to unpack is that if we really are going to make and affect change for Black males in particular, and most of my research focuses on the experiences of high achieving, academically gifted and talented African-American males. So my argument is that we're never really going to affect change for this population unless we focus on what the issues are across the educational continuum. And so that is from pre-kindergarten all the way through graduate and professional school. Hence, Black male success frameworks and models across that continuum. So that has been the focus of my research and scholarship since the very beginning, the inception. My research started back during my graduate school experience, actually. I enrolled in a course when I was a master's student at Baylor University, and that was with Dr. Susan Johnson, so former professor, mentor, and went on to finish my doctoral program at the University of Arkansas. And Dr. Marcia Imbo was another professor, and she and Dr. Johnson kind of tag team on me and made sure that I continued the work focusing on high achieving, academically gifted African-American male populations. So hence I completed my dissertation studies focused on the experiences of academically gifted African-American males in the historically Black college and university context. And as you might hear in the news now, that particular higher education institutional type, the HBCU, historically Black college and university. So without a long historical spiel about HBCUs, in the United States, we have a category of institutions that were created to provide access and opportunity for Black Americans, going back to a time when there was segregation, when there was Jim Crow, where there were not opportunities for Black people in the United States to attend college. So this institutional type was born and created to educate African Americans, educate Black Americans, many who were coming right out of slavery, giving them opportunities. Hence, we have historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs. And in the United States, the longstanding tradition, of course, we've always had from the very inception of higher education in this country, Harvard University. We've always had PWIs, predominantly white institutions. So if you juxtapose the experiences of students, particularly Black students, and particularly academically gifted and talented Black students, and particularly males, I wanted to know, what were these two institutional types doing to support and foster the gifts and talents of these Black male collegians? So my dissertation was basically looking at which institutional context was more successful at cultivating giftedness among African-American male populations, gifted African-American male populations. HBCUs, historically Black colleges, or predominantly white institutions. So I'll take you back to way back to 1997 with that doctorate, but flash forward to all these days forward. My core research that focused on Black males, focused on their experiences in those two institutional contexts, that research has served as the groundwork for everything that I've done by way of my experiences in academia, by way of my extramural funding seeking, by way of my research center. I actually have a research center at Prairie View A&M University, which is an historically Black college and university in Texas. So my research center is the Mach 3 Center, which stands for Minority, Achievement, Creativity, and High Ability. So the Mach 3 Center, my research, my scholarship, my grounding, my beginnings, looking at the experiences of gifted and talented Black males, one of the things that I have found is that we have to look at their success. A lot of it depends on their resilience. Are these Black males resilient? And to that point, most are. Just to be recognized as gifted and talented as a Black male, not just in Texas, but in the United States in general, it comes with this need for resilience because there are so many issues, travails, problems associated with just being designated as gifted and talented in the United States culture. And we will talk about several of those things across this presentation. Before we're done, we will touch upon a lot of the issues and we'll look at a lot of the buffers. And, I don't want to just come and look at the deficits. We're also going to talk about the assets. So before this presentation is over, we will take a holistic view of what we do by way of creating models and frameworks of success to ensure that our Black male populations are being successful. And one last thing before I move into that, I want to share with you, my good colleague Christine talked about, the how and the why. So one of the things that is very important, I think that researchers should do, and I always share with my graduate students that they should do, you have to provide your positionality statement. How are you and why are you the so what, as Christine would say, so what, why are you the one to be able to do this work? So what, why is it important? Well, for me, being a Black male who graduated from public schools in Texas, who graduated in the top 5% of my class, went on to undergraduate, majored in science, graduated with honors. So part of my understanding of what the experiences of these high achieving, academically gifted Black males were doing was really related to my own experiences, my own personal experiences, my own positionality, as I would say. So one of the first things researchers should do, you need to position yourself within the work to tell, why are you the one to be able to do this particular work and this particular research? So that's a little bit about why and how I am positioned to do the work on gifted Black males, because most of it relates to some of my own authentic experiences navigating and negotiating school systems, and the gifted and talented sphere, just to be an advocate for myself, what my parents went through to advocate for me. So a lot of this is woven into the very fabric of the work that I do and that I have done since the very beginning. So let's see, advance this. And again, thank you to Taisir, thank you ICIE, thank you the forum, all the planners for this important international conversation, international symposium. One of the first things I want to do, and I thought this was interesting, and I literally just added this morning. We completed, I had a colleague to come down, my colleague Nicholas Daniel Hartlip at Berea College there in Kentucky. So we have been doing some work together, and we decided that, it might be interesting. We're working on a book right now on belonging. And Christine mentioned the whole notion of belonging, what that means. So we're actually working on a book. We have a contract with a publisher and Routledge. And actually the publisher is Routledge, and the book, and I will share it in the chat a little bit later, is a book with my book series, Diverse Faculty in the Academy. So this book focuses on faculty of color and belonging. So we decided, wouldn't it be neat to have a conversation with the students at my university at Prairie View, and particularly the students who are connected to the research center, my research center at Prairie View, the Mach 3 Center, just for them to talk about the whole notion of belonging and what that means. So I thought it would be really interesting to include this video because it ties into this conversation this morning about building on resilience, and on a larger scale about the work that we do to show how this notion of resilience, belonging, all of that is coalescing in this crucible called the Mach 3 Center, my center there at Prairie View. So I thought it would be interesting to start off the conversation today about resilience, about the whole notion of Black males and high achievement, just in taking a look at this video, very short clip, to show you what we are doing, what folks are saying about, and it gives you a look at these students of color, these Black students, and their notions about belonging, some of the stuff that is related to our topic today. So let me see if I can get it to play. Oh, I think I might have to share the sound. Let's see.
If you would like to share a new screen, you just stop this one, then click on the video.
Okay, let's see here. Share a new screen.
And make sure that you press share the sound in the bottom of the screen once you share.
All right, let's see here.
Okay, now open the video.
Okay,
Make share screen again.
here we go. Let's see.
Then go to more.
Video. Okay, there we go.
Okay, so go now to more,
Okay, let's
down, and share screen sound.
okay, let's see here.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Oh, more. Okay, here we go.
In order
Yes.
to,
When you do work like
if you're
that,
doing it right,
even when
it changes you.
hard,
If you're not just trying to
the
get through to get
purpose
through, but
behind
if you're
it is
really
such
allowing
that you
the educational
not
process
only
to
me doing research,
open
but
your
it's creating
mind,
a space
never
for other
negate
scholars to be able to do
the
research
theoretical
as well.
work that
So
you're
when
doing,
I'm
because
gone,
it
we're
is
still
so very
doing the
important.
kinds of research that we need to
Centering
do
is
to
a
tell the
galvanizing
stories
space
of
to
minority
pull together
populations
the
from an
best of all worlds. It's a center that focuses on STEM achievement. It focuses on elevating students who are at the top of their game in the sciences. It's a center that focuses on how do we create an
You need to
opportunity
mute
for
the other
minoritized
one.
populations to get the word out about what they're doing by way of science,
one more
technology,
time.
engineering,
Fred, I
mathematics.
think you have two
Not just
videos at the
here
same
at
time.
Prairie View, not just here in the
Oh,
state of
yeah.
Texas,
Uh-oh. Let's see.
nationally and internationally. There's a component where we want folks to understand what it means to be Black, gifted, talented, and creative in the STEM space in an institution that is typically overlooked like a historically Black college and university.
Okay, now you are out of the screen share.
Okay, let's see. Alrighty, let me try one more time. Let's see here.
So until Fred manage the next part. So if you have any question or comment, please write it down and be ready for the discussion session. So you can just mention the name of the person you would like to answer your question or to talk about something
Yeah.
interesting for you. So we will proceed now with Fred.
And what I will do is I will share the video in the chat box so everyone can actually watch it. Let's see
Thank
here.
you. Yes.
Let me get back to, okay, get back to Resi. Okay. All righty. Now, are we back to the Prezi? Can you see it?
Just make a new share and then go back to the presentation.
Okay, let's see here. All righty, let me get back. Here we go. Okay.
Yes.
All right. All right, here we go. So this presentation, so I will share again the video. I will drop in the chat box for everyone to take a peek at their leisure. So a lot of what we're doing, and I shared this before, when we're talking about issues relating to gifted students of color, particularly gifted Black students and gifted underserved populations, and a lot of the literature and how we talk about students of color in our country, particularly in their intersections with gifted and talented, we speak in terms of them being underserved or under-identified. A lot of the underrepresentation. So those are the key terms that you hear thrown around a lot. And a lot of that is related to this whole notion of race. And at the bottom of race, at the core of race, is a notion of color differences, Black, white, brown, as we say for our Hispanic populations. And this all harkens back to one of our early talented African-American males, the person who coined the term the talented 10th, none other than W.E.B. Du Bois. So he said back in 1903, in The Souls of Black Folk, one of his seminal books, W.B. Du Bois wrote all the way back in 1903, he said that the problem of the 20th century is a problem of the color line. The relation of the darker and the lighter races of men in Asia and Africa and in America, and the islands of the world. Let's see, let me go back. And so as we look at what Du Bois said, I think that, flash forward to a very contemporary context, we're seeing some of the very same issues, some of the very same problems related to race and race relations. So the United States, the country writ large, I think that higher education is a microcosm of the macrocosm issues that we see in the country. And one of the most pervasive problems being issues related to race and race relations. So, and I love this picture of W.B. Du Bois, so I just always put it up there because I think it really, his picture, his countenance, very stern, very, very solemn. It's just like, I see those eyes, it's just piercing. And what he said, what he embodied for, not only for the race, but for the country, and actually being one of the forerunners of the field of sociology, particularly sociology from a Black perspective. Some of his landmark books, some of his landmark works, considered one of the quintessential sociological studies is his ethnographic work that he did in the Philadelphia Negro, and some of his other tomes, The Souls of Black Folk, have been part and parcel to how the culture has defined itself, how we look at race relations, and how we've had these internecine conversations about what race means juxtaposed to social class. Okay. All right. So again, a lot of what I do, and just by the very nature of the fact that I'm looking primarily, my work is focused on the experiences of academically gifted and talented Black males. So adding in that notion of Black pulls in the notion of race. And actually, if you're going to talk about the experiences of racialized populations as they relate to gifted and talented, you have to have an understanding of the history of, it's like what Connie said, what Christine said about, going back to some of those foundational books, some of those seminal texts to really understand, you can't understand the contemporary unless you go back to the historical. So I think that it's very, very important. It's not bemoaning. It's not for those that have had such an issue with critical race theory. I think that our theory has to be critical, and critical in the sense that it problematizes those issues and those things that really have meaning and really connote some importance to how we experience life, how we understand concepts, how we understand constructs, how we just live and operate. So studying gifted African-American males, it's important to understand, looking at the beginnings of race and what race has been in this country, in the United States. So if we start off, if going all the way back to 1619 to this particular schematic shows all the way to the current day. So the Black populations in the United States have gone through these waves of challenge, and somewhat you could say waves of subjugation, segregation, and oppression, starting with American slavery, moving through segregation. So the period where you had Jim Crow, where you had separate but equal, and we know many times everything was everything but equal. It was separate but not equal. So moving through the segregation phase, and now this current phase, we are dealing with mass incarceration. If you look at the rate of incarceration of Black and brown populations as compared to white populations, so now this current phase is a phase where we're looking at the implications and ramifications of what mass incarceration means writ large for our minority populations, particularly for our Black male populations. So there is an intersection here, even when we look at mass incarceration and gifted and talented. I have several colleagues that I know that study high achieving, gifted Black men who are incarcerated behind bars. And we know that the literature has shown that some of the most gifted and brilliant people in the world might be people who are incarcerated, who have been in prison for whatever reason. Sometimes their gifts and talents are the things that get them incarcerated. So but again, I show this schematic to show you that it has been this long-standing tradition of where race has played a major factor in the varied life of Black African-American populations. So since our inception in this country, race has always played a part. Folks might want to minimize it. They may want to say, oh, race doesn't matter. Slavery was a long time ago. That doesn't matter now. Well, when you have a population that from the very inception in a country their inception has been based on some form of marginalization or oppression, or as my friend Christine said, colonization, that has all kinds of implications for who they are, the soul, the what, the why, that Christine talked about. So much of that is tethered to this notion of race and how race has been experienced and operationalized in this country. Okay, so let's move. Another video, I won't show it. I don't want to tangle up our time, but I promise, I will put each one of these videos at the very end in the chat so you can watch. But just to give you like a little synopsis, this video is of one of my, W.B. Du Bois was a hero, and James Baldwin is definitely a hero. And this particular video clip, he is engaging in a conversation with a psychologist, and the psychologist is trying to tell him, this is on the Dick Cavett show back in the, I believe in the 70s. And this psychologist is trying to tell James Baldwin that basically, you're making too much about race. Things are equal. You're a Black man, you're a professional, I'm a white man, I'm a professional, all things are equal. And Baldwin is like, well, no, they're not. he's like, I am, there are so many things that I experience, that, I am told that, you can only live in this neighborhood. You can only, shop at this particular store, or you're always surveilled, you're always watched. So basically, the experiences that you're chronicling being white and male in the United States are quantitatively and qualitatively different than my experiences as a Black male in this country. So basically, you don't know what you're talking about until you have walked in my skin, or the state of affairs with race and race relations in this country, for me, it's a different set of experiences than what you're experiencing. Again, I will send that to you. Another video, I will show this one to you. I will send it to you as well. And this is the Reverend Dr. Samuel DeWitt Proctor. And as mentioned earlier in my bio, before coming to Prairie View A&M University, I was on the East Coast in New Jersey at Rutgers University. And at Rutgers, I was the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Endowed Chair. And in that role, I found it important for me to not only know something about the Endowed Chair's namesake, but also to be able to share something that was connected to him, something that would not only entrench me in this endowed chair, but something that would, foreground who he was and what his scholarship, what his research was, what his raison d'etre. So what it meant to be a Samuel DeWitt Proctor Chair was important to me. So I found this interesting short sermonette titled The Scratch Line. And in this sermonette, Dr. Proctor talks about how he was born into a family, how he had a grandmother who was a slave in Chesterfield County in the 1800s, how he was born to a father and a mother who were both college educated. So he said he had, books in the home. He said he was an advanced kid. He was never he skipped the 3rd grade, the 5th grade, the 7th grade. He never was in, those grades. Everything happening for him. He said, all these things smiling on me. I went to college at 15 on a scholarship. He said, I had all these wonderful things and my buddies up the street had none of that. So he said, so it is important for us for those of us who have inherited blessings and benefits, to turn around to help those who have inherited deficits. And it is our task, it should be our ontological task of helping everyone to rise up to the scratch line where we are. So everyone can earn and enjoy the benefits of life. So I use that particular video clip. Again, I'll send it to you, very short. But I use that clip as kind of like my bellwether, for lack of a better expression, to test the waters out there for people to understand, what it meant to focus on students, focus on their assets, and focus on what do we need to do to cull those assets, as opposed to only focusing on their deficits. You're always going to have students who, especially with our gifted students, you're going to have some students who can walk into your classroom. They've had resources. They've had what we call social and cultural capital. If you look at Pierre Bourdieu, some of his earlier work, they're going to have the capital. They're going to come from families that had books in the home, that had resources, that had computers, that had financial means. You might have a mom who's a doctor, a father who's a lawyer, but you're also going to have kids who are coming who have the academic stuff, but they're coming from backgrounds where they didn't have access to the resources. They didn't have books in their home. They didn't have parents who read to them. They didn't have access to technology. They didn't have parents who were college educated. So all of those things have implications. So there are some students who would come way above the scratch line. There are some students who come to your classes below the scratch line. But what Proctor said is it's our goal to get everyone up to the scratch line, so everyone has a fair chance of moving forward to earn and enjoy all of the benefits. So with that said, let's move. Again, part of what we do at the Mach 3 Center, part of my research, part of my scholarship, part of the focus on Black males, we have to problematize and deconstruct this notion of race. Because by the very nature of me saying that I focus on academically gifted African-American, academically gifted Black male, I've thrown in the specter of race. And because that notion of race and the intersection of race and gifted potential for Black male populations means everything. It's not just being gifted and male, it's being gifted Black and male. You know, even going all the way back to some of our early coming out of education, but just in the entertainment field, one of the early songs, to be young, gifted, and Black. So each one of those constructs means something. Nina Simone sang it, to be young, gifted, and Black, but each one of those things has meaning. It carries weight. It has intersectionality, as we say, in the sense that we have to understand each one of those constructs and what it brings to our understandings of this particular population. That is why I start with this whole notion of race and looking at what race means and what race, the implications of race in the United States. We well know we've kind of been in a hotbed of racial tension in this country for a long time, but probably heightened here within the past 7, 8 years, 10 years, particularly with some of the past presidential administration, and even trying to come out of some of the retrenchment that we had, so to speak, with the last presidential administration to a current administration that's trying to right the wrong and cure some of the ills that we have been experiencing, and even some of the problems that they're having in trying to deal with this country's issues that center on and that focus on race and the incongruities we have with understanding race and effectively treating race so that, everyone is able to rise up to that scratch line, as Dr. Proctor said. So with that said, I have a few slides. This comes from a repository that said, these are like the 20 most important slides that you can include in your discussions about race. Well, I'm not going to give you all 20. I'm just going to pull out the ones that are specifically connected to the topic that we're discussing today, and that is building on resilience, Black gifted males in the United States. So let's look here. When we look at the current state of affairs related to race in the United States, let's take a peek. So this very first slide, it comes from the Gallup poll, Gallup Foundation. And what they have found here is that they asked the question, would you say race relations between whites and Blacks are very good, somewhat bad, or very bad? And you see here the lighter green trend line represents white adults. The darker green trend line represents Black adults. One of the first things that I would say that is striking, telling about this particular slide is the fact that you have a difference between which you would expect, but I think not only is it an expectation that there would be a difference, but I think what's more poignant is the fact that how wide some of those gaps are over time. So we see here, you have gaps, and then you have this wide gap here occurring at 2006, still moving forward, still very, very wide, all the way down to like 2013-ish or so. Still a gap, but starting to close a bit. But the interesting thing is the overall trend is on a downward trajectory for both populations, Black and white. So two things to note, and I always share with grad students, I'm like, you can't just read charts to read the chart. What is the meaning behind the chart? What does this mean? So not only you're seeing multiple things happening here, you're seeing that there are gaps between, you're also seeing that the gaps are changing over time. And when you start to see these peaks and valleys, it's interesting when you see a peak and a valley, then you should immediately start thinking about what is going on contextually. And contextually, I mean, what is happening in the country? What is happening in the state? What is happening in our communities that would trigger, these wide variations or these spikes or these valleys? And again, overall, you're seeing a downward trend for both populations. So important to look at, what do these charts mean? So what does it mean? So would you say race relations between whites and Blacks are very good, somewhat bad, or very bad? That was the question. But now the analysis, when you problematize and deconstruct, what does it mean? Okay, let's move. So another chart, and again, I think this is very important, looking at the unemployment rates of Black and white Americans. So the blue trend line represents white populations, and the orange trend line represents Black populations. And so we see, again, what's the story here? Again, the whole notion of there are gaps. Where are the gaps? When have the gaps been the most pervasive? And what is the overall trend in each one of these lines? So, and right here we see that, from 2007-ish, all the way up to I would say the largest gap somewhere in around after 2011, but again, the gaps have continued all the way to where we're looking here at 2019, and kind of a big spike here, but still a gap. Another important, so as we look at socioeconomic status, and we look at the wage gap, a lot of our Black intelligentsia, a lot of the Black intellectuals, particularly those who are heading up organizations, foundations, movements, you see that there's a huge discussion now about Black wealth, the gap between Black wealth, white wealth. One of our African-American icons in this country, Byron Allen, he just had the inaugural convening of his griot foundation, or griot. It was, well, the event was called the griot event. And basically he had a lot of these Black thought leaders, particularly Black thought leaders from the economic sphere. And one of the, I was really moving to listen to Robert Smith, the African-American male, the philanthropist, billionaire out of Austin, Texas, for him to talk about. He was the African-American male that gave all the funding to Morehouse College, and has done several things across the country. And another one of the speakers was, his last name is Peebles. I think I forgot his first name, but Mr. Peebles, he is a developer, and I believe he's in Chicago. And it was interesting to see, listen to his discussion about Black wealth and white wealth. And he basically charted and showed how the gaps between Blacks and whites, particularly those who are the upper echelon as far as financial status, and also how much funding goes to, like, white-owned companies, corporations, developers versus Black corporations and developers. And the gap was just like catastrophic. It was like trillions. And he was showing that the gap is so wide that basically we have what he calls an economic apartheid when we look at the wealth accumulation of Blacks versus white populations in this country. I bring all this up to say that, and it's interesting that all of our major movements right now, at the core is a discussion about Black wealth, Black wages, Black earning, Black economic impact, because that is such a major important part of, and a conversation that is typically not included when we start to talk about disparities, when we talk about Blacks. We're talking about education, we're talking about these things, but all of this, is in some ways connected to economic impact and economic resources. So I put this slide up there. This shows the wage gap between Black and white Americans. We see here 59%, continuing to widen all the way to 2017. From 1967, it was 59%. Now there's a 62% wage gap between Black and white Americans. You want to talk about education, you want to talk about gifted and talented, you want to talk about students having resources, want to talk about them having access to AP courses and international baccalaureate, all those things. A lot of that is tied to, do you have resources? Do you have parents? Do you have access to things that are going to, are you, whereas the white student might have parents who can afford for them to take SAT, ACT prep, to take tutoring, private tutoring. Well, as we see with these wage gaps, not so much for parents of color, for Hispanic parents, Black parents. So again, there is an intersection. Economics and education, they're like a person in the shadow. I mean, they're like, tick for tack, they are connected. Here's another, again, driving home that whole notion of how economics plays a major role in education. The real median household income versus overall poverty rate by race. So you see here, again, dark blue, white populations, and orange, Black populations. So we see here, overall poverty rate, 2018, it was 8.1% for white populations, 20.7% for Black populations. The real median household income, 2018, was $70,600 for white populations, and a mere 41.7 thousand for Black populations. Story there, what is it? Gaps, yes. What do those mean? One other, here is upward mobility by city and race. And here you see like little subtext says, household income rankings of children born into the 25th income percentile. So it's looking at the household income, the rankings of kids who come from these households in the bottom fourth tier economic strata. And you see across the cities in there, the story is again the same: gaps, differences, disparities, but you see the disparities are more pronounced in particular cities, more pronounced in some cities than others. You see, even when I look at my city, I live in right outside of Houston, Texas. So you see across the board from New York to Houston to Memphis to all points in between, you see these major gaps that are occurring. And here, even when we look at the populations, Black and white, that are doing better economically, I should say, given the fact that we're looking at individuals who've assumed or who have been positioned to receive professional managerial employment. So these are the CEOs, those people at the top of the organizational chart. Well, even when you look at those who have achieved those very top rungs, there are still disparities. So we look here, 31% African-American, Black, 22% Hispanic, Latino, 41% white, and 54% Asian, which is another conversation that we should have had, looking across the board at, even when you pull in different minority populations, and what does it mean? Because there are status differences even among minority populations. So look at, on this very chart, look at managerial positions, Asian versus Black versus Hispanic, what those differences mean and what they connote. So now we start to get into the crux of the matter when we're looking here at AP courses. And that is an area that when I look at gifted and talented, so my indicators, the canary in the coal mine, the bellwether, the litmus test, the whatever you want to use as the metaphor, the way that I can tell if our Black males, if any of our populations by way of gifted and talented are actually being successful, or is their participation rates in AP, participation rates in gifted and talented, participation rates in International Baccalaureate. So when we look here, this chart actually chronicles advanced placement, and we see advanced course credit earned in secondary school by subject and by race. So we see here across all subjects, and it says here, percent of students earning any credit in advanced placement in International Baccalaureate courses. All right, so we see all subject areas, 40% white populations, all subjects, 23% Black populations, math, 17% white, 6% Black, 16% science, and 8% versus 8% in science. So we see, again, the story starts to unfold. I could say you could overlay the economic indicators, the previous slides that you saw, layer that right along with what you're seeing now with advanced placement, what you're seeing with education. So this is the linchpin. Herein lies the rub, folks. So the economics and the education, they're connected, very, very connected in some interesting ways. We see that they are linked. They're like, hand in glove in a lot of ways. And here is another one that shows generational mobility by race. It says children whose parents only graduated high school who earned a college degree. So these are kids who their parents only graduated high school, and these are the rates that the kids went on to earn college degrees. And you see here for Asian populations, 48.9%, white 24.5%, 15%, and then all the way down to American Indian, Alaska Native, 9.2%. This particular slide is telling because it says that, for Asian and white populations, even though, those numbers are not, particularly for white populations, not that great, but still, you still have roughly 25% of these white students go on to receive a college degree, whether, even if their parents only got a high school diploma. So but then you see the implications for what that means for American Indian populations and for Black populations. Again, connecting the dots here. Education, economics, opportunity. I mean, it's all like it's a connected dot puzzle. I mean, we can color in and see what the true picture is. And here is, again, driving home that whole notion of connection to education. Here's the college attainment of Black and white Americans. So again, the story is, look at the gaps. Look at the differences here. 35.2% white populations, 25.2% Black populations. And over time, we see that all the way back to 1964 to the present. I mean, we've always had gaps, and now it seems like the gaps are wider. Even though the college attainment, the trend is going up, but the gap is getting wider. So what does that mean? That's a narrative and that's a story. And I have seen articles where, oh, well, you know, there are more African-American males who are finishing, who are going off to college. There are more Hispanic males going off to college. Well, going off to college, but then again, what about that attainment of the degree? So going off to college doesn't necessarily mean that they completed college. We know that there is a retention and a persistence problem for Black and brown populations, and for a whole lack of a better discussion, there's a lot of information out about those reasons why Black and brown males go, they don't persist or they're not retained in higher education. And many of those things associated with notions of race and marginalization, oppression. And one of my favorite theorists is William Sedlacek. He did work University of Maryland years ago. And Sedlacek, he basically popularized this term called non-cognitive variables. So non-cognitive variables. And what Sedlacek found with his research is that the majority of Black students that he was studying, he studied, you know, hundreds, thousands of Black students just to look at their collegiate experiences. And what he found was that Black students, by and large, many of them were dropping out, stopping out, not being successful, not being retained, not continuing, not completing their degrees. It had nothing to do with their intellectual capital. It had nothing to do with their intellectual abilities. Because when you look at it, this Black student got into the University of Maryland, got into Stanford, got into Harvard, just like the white student. So that meant that they basically had, you know, they both had high SAT, had high ACT scores, or all of the metrics that were used. They basically must have scored pretty close together. They got in, but for whatever reason, the Black students were falling out. So if it's not the cognitive, if it's not their intellectual ability, if it's not their smarts, what is it? So that's what Sedlacek found. He found that there are all these non-cognitive variables that impact Black and brown students. Non-cognitive variables like not having a peer group to study with, not having a professor who's concerned about that student's well-being, not having an environment where they feel like there are people who support me, who look like me, who care about me, not having, you know, so many of things, having pressures, you know, the student who comes in, the minority student who comes in from a very impoverished background. So that student might be in college still sending money home and still supporting the family at home, whereas the white student might have come in with parents who were of higher socioeconomic status, who could afford to send the kid to college. So the kid didn't have, well, here's an example. So the literature shows that the majority of Black and brown college students, they have to work. They have to work through their 4 years of college. So they're balancing working, many of them, a full-time job and being a college student. Not saying that there are a lot of white students that work as well, but to the degree that Black and brown students work, I mean, it's not as significant a factor for that population as Black population. These are all non-cognitive variables that impact and that have some influence on the academic experience. So this is just this particular story. It was in the Dallas Morning News, and this chronicled the story of Darius Brown. That's this picture. Darius Brown, African-American male, who was is one of the few students in the country. This article is back from 2016, so several years ago, 6 years ago. And he actually received a Bill and Melinda Gates Millennium Scholarship, which is pretty rare. He's a rare bird. In that, I think there are only like 1,000 that are given out. At that time, it was like 1,000, maybe 53,000 applicants. So it was very, very highly, one of the most highly competitive scholarships in this country. And he was one of the recipients. And he graduated from a predominantly Black high school in Dallas, Texas. It looks like it's Lancaster. So the pronunciation, a lot of folks will say Lancaster, but we say Lancaster in here in Texas. But he graduated from Lancaster High School and went on to use his Gates Millennium Scholarship. The Gates Scholarship provides for students to from their undergraduate all the way through their doctorates. He chose to attend one of my former institutions, Texas A&M University, College Station. And, but the story chronicles his experiences with going through public school, and the lack of understanding of what it meant to be gifted Black and male. Not only the things that he had to deal with, but the things that his mother had to deal with to advocate for him, the mother of a gifted Black male child, all of the attendant things that go along with that. In my book, side note, I have a book, came out several years ago, Building on Resilience, Models and Frameworks of Black Male Success Across the P20 Pipeline, really the foundation of this presentation. So the Building on Resilience book, and I'll put that in the chat as well. One of the chapters in that book was written by my good friend and colleague, Dr. Tarek Grantham. And his chapter is on teaching parents, particularly parents of Black males, to become what he calls upstanders. He says that many times parents are pushed into what he calls bystander status. So his goal is in that chapter to teach parents how to become upstanders, meaning that they can advocate, they can serve as like conduits for their student success. They can talk to teachers, principals, administrators, gifted coordinators to help them to understand who these Black males are and what they need to be successful. And that's the thing that this particular article in the Dallas Morning News about Darius brings out, is the fact that, in the state of Texas at that time, Texas has 6.5% Black students in the state, only 3% in gifted and talented. At that time, Texas had 26.6% Hispanic students in the state, only 20% in gifted and talented. And what it said is that, nationally, it reported on how Black students go unidentified, underidentified for AP, IB, all the stuff that I just talked about. So all that's in the article. And it also talked about how even in minority serving schools, there is still underrepresentation of Black males. So I say all that to say, even though Darius was in Lancaster High School, which is a predominantly Black school, but still there was underrepresentation of Black males in gifted and talented. So
2 minutes.
Say it again.
We have 2 to 3 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So really quickly, just want to show you this particular slide when I'm out working with schools and school districts. I put this up there because part of the research agenda that I tried to foreground for schools and school districts is that these Black male populations, they come in varied and different forms. So this particular slide is one where I asked the question, so who's gifted? So just looking at these pictures, who would you say on this picture is gifted? And many times, the reason I put that out there is that we make these assumptions that we can identify who's gifted and talented just by looking at their pictures. So phenotype, does the African-American male who's there in the picture sagging with the gold chain, could he be gifted? Is he gifted? Or the Black males that look like they're incarcerated, are they gifted? Well, could be. I wanted to know, what is it that brings out the resilience and what makes a African-American male manifest his gifts and talents who comes from that particular socioeconomic status, that particular background, that particular experience, but he's still sitting in your physics class with a 99.9 average. And very quickly, when you get an opportunity, I will send you, here's another link that I will pass on to you. It comes from the SHOT report. If any of you are interested in doing research and more work on Black males, I would encourage you to go to the SHOT Foundation, SCHOTT. They put out what they call the Black Brown report, Black Boys report, every 3 years. And it is a free resource, and it gives you a lot of good information on these populations. Okay. One of the major issues that we have to talk about whenever we're doing this work is diversity, equity, inclusion. And this particular Venn diagram comes from an article that I read that talks about how we miss the fourth base. It's diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So the article says that if you think of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, if you do all those things the right way, then they should all coalesce into this whole notion of belonging. Christine alluded to that earlier. We have to think about what it means to belong. And for our gifted Black males, I just wanted to put this up there. Been a lot of research. We see nationwide approximately 13% of elementary students from high-income families are enrolled in gifted and talented, just 2% from low-income families. That ties into the conversation that we had a little bit earlier about resources and what that means. And I'm going to move us forward. So there are 3 primary reasons that gifted Black males go unidentified or under-identified for gifted and talented. One being lack of teacher referrals, teacher nominations is another way of saying that. Number 2, poor test performance. And 3, choice. And what I mean by choice, students choose, many of them, particularly Black males, will choose, Black and brown males, choose not to manifest, choose not to show their gifts and talents, because by showing that I'm gifted and talented, there's an opportunity cost, meaning that, no one wants to hang out with me. No one wants to play basketball with me on the weekend. No one wants to be my friend because I'm in that egghead group down the hall where I don't relate to my friends anymore because I'm the smart one. And Donna Ford talks about the 7 symptoms of deficit thinking. I won't read these to you, but I'll just, when I share the information, you'll see that there are, she says, 7 reasons, why we look at Black males, particularly our talented Black males, many times from this deficit perspective. So how do we move the conversation from deficits to looking at assets, what it means for them to be successful? And I will stop right there.
Thank you so much, Brett, for this presentation or research-based presentation. And I think you raised many questions. So it is time to say on behalf of both institutions, the University of Rijeka, and in particular, Teachers Training College, and the International Center for Innovation in Education. I would like to say thank you to all our presenters today, including Connie Phelps, Christine Boyko-Head, and Fred Bonner for this international symposium. And now I would like to open the platform for any comment or questions. So first of all, if you have any comment or question, you can write it in the chat room, and we will promise to answer all your questions written there. But we will give a limited number of questions, so we can answer. You can ask direct to any one of the speakers. So we will start now. So Fred, you can stop sharing.
There we go.
Thank you so much. So I will start some of the questions. Sorry. Any question first before I start? Maher, you can start. I will remove, you can unmute yourself. Yes, you can unmute and then you can ask, please.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. First, thank you for organizing this great symposium. Second, since Fred is done and he finished the last one, I would like to ask him a quick question. You know, this semester I'm teaching a couple courses, and then I have a couple African-American students in each class. And I would like to simply share this with you. In each class, I have one excellent achiever academically and one at the bottom of everything. What can I make out of this? It's like, to me, it's like any other, you know, race, any other. I don't know to what extent I should connect this to this racial, you know, parameter you've been talking about.
Great question. I would say, and actually you chimed in with what I was about to say. I was going to say, you know, it's really the issue you bring up is really kind of like students in general. I have, you know, white students, Hispanic students. You know, you're going to have some that are flying high and some that are just barely making it. With each assignment, it's a struggle. But I would say that kind of goes to my experiences. I would say I'm a little bit country and a little bit rock and roll in that my doctoral training is in higher ed administration, but my master's level training is in K-12 curriculum and instruction. So I think a lot of that just goes to what we do for the gifted. I think, you know, it's almost like what we do for the gifted, we also should do for the least of these. So I apply that to the classroom as well. So good teaching style, learning modalities, all that stuff that we get in our curriculum courses and curriculum teachings is that I think that, you know, as you look at those students and those wide variations, then what are some of the things that we can do to modify the learning environment that would ensure that they could be successful? So some of the attendant problems that I mentioned, you know, are things that, you know, the social capital, the cultural capital, all that, well, you know, we can't change that. I mean, you come from the family that you come from, but what is manifested in front of you, the outcome is that some are doing well and some are not doing well. So now I think to bridge that gap, what do we do by way of our teaching style and our learning styles? So is there a preferred learning modality that you see, you know, are your African-American males, are your Hispanic males? Donna Ford mentions this term called VERV, where Black students and Hispanic students, you know, they prefer, they're more kinesthetic. They want to move around, they want to talk, they want to engage. So their learning styles, their learning preferences involve all these different modalities as opposed to just sitting in a straight line in the desk, you know, for an hour for the professor or the teacher just to pontificate. You know, I want to move, I want activities, I want things. So I don't know that that's the case, but it could be. So how can we focus on these multimodal ways of teaching, focus on multimodal ways that students are allowed to manifest their learning? And I think when we really start to concentrate on the teaching styles, the learning styles, you find the students, you meet them where they are, and then you help them all to rise. So that whole notion of I'm going to teach to the middle. If I teach this way, everybody should get it. Well, it doesn't work that way because you have some beneath the scratch line. You have some students that come to your class. Some of us we don't have to open our mouths one time. That student will make an A on every exam. They don't need us. There are some students that every word you say, they have to hinge on because they're not getting it. So I think that's where the teacher, the professor has to show up in ways that, say that, hey, I'm really invested in matching my teaching styles to your learning styles to ensure that we all rise to the occasion.
If you allow me, thank you, Maher. So if you allow me, we will go back to Rijeka. So because we have a number of people with the Faculty of Teacher Education in Rijeka. So if they have any question, because as you know, we have a group of people on site for this symposium, and we have, most of the people online. So any question from the people in Rijeka? You have the mic. Seems no. We have also participants from a large number of countries today, and one of my friends now saying hello from University of Education in Schwäbisch Gmünd in Germany, of course. Hello from Egypt and so on. Bania Luca, Liliana Krenta. Okay, so from Morocco, from Kansas. Any other question or comment? Trevor, you are silent today.
I want to say thank you, Yamin.
Yeah, thank you, Gulsha. So very nice to see you.
Yes, good to see you, everyone, and Christine, Fred, Connie, and we were together with Connie last week in the NAGC conference. So thank you so much for
Yes,
this
thank
symposium.
you. Thank you for joining.
So useful for us. Thank you.
Yes, Trevor. So thank you, Gulsha, for being here with us. So thank you again. So Trevor, it is yours.
This has been a great privilege to be involved with so many people. And thank you, Connie. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Taisir. It has been really interesting. And thank you for mentioning chandelier assessments, not because I'm trying to sell it, but I think with respect to what you said, Christine, I think it's really interesting because you talk about turning education upside down. I think we need to turn assessment upside down because particularly I can only really speak of in America, and here I am in Vermont. I know I'm English, but I have some problems with what's happening in England also with respect to gifted education because my family is there. However, what I try and do with my assessments that are absolutely holistic, I was going to share a screen that I'm sending out to a parent of a document that I'm about to send to a parent of a child I saw just last week for 10 hours. And the problem with that particular issue is that because of what I'm putting down, because I'm doing an MTIC, Myers-Briggs piece of research on how personality can impact gifted education. We're looking at math fluency and various other things, but we're also looking at introversion, where you are a reflective thinker, where you are an F, a feeler. You don't want to hurt anybody. And so when something's happening in your classroom, you're not necessarily interacting as the teacher is expecting. And so you get this sense of deficit. And once you've got deficit, then you've got the potential of being assessed as disabled. And if you're assessed as being disabled, what you have then is a real major problem, because it inevitably takes you to special education, where the knowledge of people is not in any way directed towards highly able children. And so what you've done is you're treated as a disabled person. And that then goes to Fred's point, because you talked, Fred, about belonging. Suddenly you don't belong to the group that inside yourself you do belong. And I, particularly dealing with younger children, this particular child was chronologically 5th grade, but I would say intellectually 16, 17, 18 years old. In fact, the word did actually say she was beyond school in reading and various other tasks. But she's considered ASD, autistic, or, which is comorbid, is ADHD, but she's not. And that needs turning upside down, because the problem is, if you perceive yourself to be something, then you often act that way, or are impacted in terms of how you see yourself and how you carry yourself in the world. And I think that links to what you were saying, Fred, in particular, with respect to race, whether it be males or females. And one of the things I try and do with my assessments is, in fact, give the parents a report that would normally just say what's going on with the child, but I try and make it a tutorial, so that in fact they can then advocate for the child on the basis of knowledge that they wouldn't necessarily have. I could say a lot more, but I won't, and I thank Taisir for the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Trevor, for this valuable addition to what we were talking about. Thank you. Any other comment? Okay, if there is no comments and questions, so I would like to thank you so much after 3 hours of this international symposium, and we are looking forward to meeting with you again in the next event. Thank you and have a great evening.